Really honored here today to have Janne Nolan to talk about the 2009 Nuclear Posture Review. It's an interesting conversation because if you've read An Elusive Consensus, one of Janne's many and great books, you're probably inherently skeptical of the idea that a nuclear posture review is going to produce any changes to U.S. nuclear posture whatsoever. And so we at the New America Foundation and the Nuclear Strategy and Nonproliferation Initiative actually commissioned Janne to write a paper sort of taking some of the lessons learned in An Elusive Consensus and applying them to this forthcoming administration. And I hope that she will in some ways talk about some of her recommendations. This is, I suppose now, the second time that I've been on a panel with her where we've talked about the Nuclear Posture Review. And I think that everybody should feel free to be as skeptical or cynical about the Nuclear Posture Review as you'd like, because it really raises some interesting questions. I think one of the facts that I like to put on the table before we start these discussions is people in Washington have short memories, but we've only done 2 nuclear posture reviews. I mean, it's gotten kind of the idea that this is something that we do on a regular basis, but that's not true. We've only done 2, and they were very different beasts. The 1993-94 Nuclear Posture Review was something the Clinton administration wanted to do, and perhaps despite the best intentions didn't seem to produce very much. And the 2001-2002 Nuclear Posture Review is something that Congress made the administration do, I think largely as a delaying tactic. It was a way of putting off tough decisions that would have been taken under the Clinton administration that Congress didn't want to deal with, so they just kicked the can down the road. And I think in the time-honored game of tit for tat, we've done that back to them. With the Democratic Congress has, I think, with a Republican president, has suggested that we're going to await the outcome of another election. But it's an interesting question because I think that in both cases, not being cynical, members of Congress were right to ask for answers to these questions. And I think that it's probably impossible for us to imagine making sensible choices about things like the reliable replacement warhead or the size of our complex unless we know what purpose our nuclear weapons serve. And so with, I think, the idea that these are questions we want answered, I think the conversation we want to have today is whether a nuclear posture review is the right way to answer them. And if it's not the optimal way, what can we do as a community that will at least make it the most productive exercise possible? And so I hope that you all listen with rapt attention while Janne helps us make some progress toward that goal.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That would be rapt attention, I hope. I think I have a student here. I do. And you know all about rapt attention, right? Thank you all for being here on this rainy day to talk about nuclear posture reviews. This actually is a cyclical topic. It comes in and out of focus, and if you live in Washington long enough, you see the cycles. I hate people who promote their own work. But what's ironic about, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of this book, which is not significant to me particularly at all, because it's out of print, but you can still buy used copies for $2. But 20 years, that means 1989, that was a long time ago, and the studies now that are percolating about the Nuclear Posture Review, people are calling about this book, they want to get wisdom, knowledge, lessons learned, because there isn't very much written about the really chilling thought that your nuclear destiny belongs in large measure in bureaucratic hands. And this shouldn't be so shocking to some degree, but it's counterintuitive. It's not something that most people want to think about, which reflects a broader reality that we, as a country, having operated throughout the decades of the Cold War, have wanted to think that nuclear policy and security policy falls outside of the government that we know, the one that Americans like to complain about, the post office, the IRS, the people that collect your trash or don't, when in truth, and this is also a cultural phenomenon, that you look at popular culture, the depiction of national security is one in which there is a secret government that's taking care of these truly important decisions. Those of you who have heard this, I apologize, but I think of the film in which Nicole Kidman, playing Jessica Stern, for those of you who know her, dismantles a nuclear device in the White House in the nick of time. Hey, how are you? Just in the nick of time, as an NSC staffer, and her perfect makeup and tiny shorts, and phew, you know, but you know what? Jessica was never asked to do that, and you know, she didn't really wear that much makeup, and you know what? Nobody in the NSC really knows how to do that. And there isn't anyone that I know in many years of working in this business who knows how to do that, at least not in the nick of time in Washington. So, but the idea is that there is actually, your government is not made up of, I mean, the nuclear government is not made up of all those people that you don't like when you go down to the Department of Motor Vehicles. The idea that there is a clash of interest groups, that there are people who are really on very narrow agendas, who are ambitious, who are careerists, who have very conventional views, who don't care. It's a very frightening thought, and this is part of the reason that we've actually deified, in a way, the whole idea of national security governance as being outside of the interest group give and take. And very important to this discussion, why it is that there's an impenetrability and resilience to the governance of nuclear weapons, particularly the bureaucracies that surround the decision-making that tell you how many nuclear weapons we should have. Who decides how many nuclear weapons we should have? And for what reason? In what proportion to conventional forces? In what proportion should they be naval or air or land-based? When I wrote this book, I was completely clueless, which is a really good thing, because I asked questions of senior planning officials, senior generals, admirals, that are so taboo that it's only because it was 20 years ago, and I practically had pigtails, you know. I mean, of course, that they just started talking to me. And I couldn't do this book, probably. I couldn't do this book now because people would be upset. But you know, afterwards, and I really didn't know, what I was interested in, actually, was the aberration that was called the Strategic Defense Initiative. I had been working first at SAIC, a Beltway bandit, and I had moved over to the Armed Services Committee. And there was a transformation, a suspension of reality that occurred with the speech, and Bruce over here will remember this, that suddenly the president gave a speech and reality disappeared. And the Armed Services Committee, senators are pulling out these then view graphs with descriptions of these, you know, post-atmospheric, exo-atmospheric, post-boost phase interception, a complete suspension of technological, practical reality, but arguing vociferously over these charts about which they knew nothing. For the most part, there was a handful, maybe a handful of senators who tried to learn the details, but there were actually very few details. It became an article of partisan faith whether or not you, quote, supported the Strategic Defense Initiative. And having worked for a very conservative person in the Pentagon as doing analysis for T.K. Jones, some of you may remember him, General Abramson, who headed up the missile defense program, thought that I was a supporter, because he put it, we thought you were we thought you were one of us. And I had gone to work on armed services for Senator Hart, and he was surprised, General Abramson, that we were asking questions about it. He thought that was disloyal. I was trying to explain how an entire town like Washington, full of really intelligent, educated people, could go hysterically nuts like those convents in the Middle Ages that are written about, all talking about this, multi-layered defenses. And stumbled across this truth, I believe to be truth, that the SCI was no different than a half a dozen or more of these civilian innovations in nuclear doctrine that were being imposed on the operational world, the planners, the people that work behind the scenes, who were being asked to tinker with the war plans, the plans that put weapons into targets, to make them do things that they couldn't possibly do. Whether you call this wage and win a protracted war, or you called it actually flexible response, or the host of other names that were superimposed, everything from massive retaliation on, pretty much, created a huge disconnect between the so-called political guidance and what could actually be done in the war plans. And though I'm vastly over-summarizing, there's a good reason for that, which is that from a planner standpoint, there's really nothing very interesting to do with nuclear weapons, strategic forces particularly, but also tactical weapons. The only interesting scenario, as Sidrell always says, is the disarming first strike. Once you get beyond that, everything is so uncertain and unpredictable that the various tinkerings that were demanded of planners by these operational innovation, declaratory innovations, really just got superimposed with, I'd say, very minimal, at least this is what is argued here, minimal changes in the operational world. And over time, the disconnect between the political world, what was being asked of nuclear weapons, and what was being said that nuclear weapons were for, and what was actually being done behind the scenes, the disconnect got worse and worse and worse. So that's the context, the history, and the question is, what's new? 20 years later, well, the whole world is upside down and changed. The entire reason, the edifice of deterrence, of the triad, the entire raison d'etre of having strategic forces is gone, right? Soviet Union disappeared. We didn't know it was going to disappear, but it did. But in terms of the reflection of that in our forces, it's all still there, it's just smaller. So something's wrong, you would think. There should be, if not an automatic alteration, there should be something that's, reflecting. Now, a lot of people will disagree with what I just said, and that's what the whole game is about, because I think, as Jeffrey knows very well, and most people in this room, most of whom know, 10 times as much as I do about this whole issue. And every time I come here, it's full of people that know exactly what I'm going to say. And, never mind. It's like a little cell. We get together. I did see Sidrell recently, and I said, since now he's determined to abolish nuclear weapons in his lifetime, I said, after you abolish nuclear weapons, would you promise that we can still get together to talk? This is so interesting. What is this all about? What is a nuclear posture review? As Jeffrey said, there's only been two. Actually, there were three. One was sort of a phantom review done by Dick Cheney in 1991, when he asked for a PSYOP briefing when they realized that in Bush 1 that the Soviet Union was falling apart. And it was not a happy event for the people that were there. Larry Welch was one of the participants. They put up a map of the Soviet Union, and they had those laser things. And our doctrine is that we don't target population centers per se. You always have to say per se. And so they're shooting at the different target sets and explaining them. And within seconds, Moscow is covered with these red dots, but saturated with red. I mean, it's turned into this seeping giant red, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And Cheney lost it, which anyone who's ever seen him lose his temper read about it. And he said, what the fuck? What is, so the explanation, and this
we
is...
are recording this,
Yeah. I didn't say anything. Did I? But he is a colorful character, and I wanted to just, in the interest of historical and empirical. The explanation was that at the point by 1991, what's happened is that the science of targeting, of putting that many weapons, 10,000 and up, to that many targets, the intelligence has multiplied the number of targets. We keep exponentially increasing our ability to put warheads on platforms. We can then match those targets to weapons. And the science has become, just the sheer calculations have become, the algorithms have become sufficiently complex that it's become highly specialized. So the person who is planning for the land-based part, or even more specialized than that, the MX missile deliveries, who's shooting at, he's not shooting at Moscow per se, he's shooting at a suburb of Moscow where there's such and such industry, war supporting, et cetera. I think we still had war supporting industry as one of the target categories. It's not coordinated with any SLBM targets. So there's not just redundancy in the actual target set of one set of plans, but multiple target sets are interfering with one another. In any case, Moscow's toast. And there was a good reason not to target population centers, certainly leadership centers, because there was this notion that you could have, at some point, certainly an inflexible response, but in different periods, that you would not want to target leadership because you'd want to be able to negotiate a halt to the hostilities and have a chat about it. We endured and survived the Cold War. It's pretty amazing, and we should take some, I don't know whether the word is pride, but we should have at least taken a moment to say, oh my God, when you think about the things that have yet to be examined, what would have happened if the whole doctrine of flexible response in Europe, the dedication to initiate the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield in the event that there was even a vague possibility of the numerically superior Warsaw Pact forces were going to defeat or start to defeat Western forces, we would initiate the use of nuclear weapons jointly with conventional forces. And then we would stop, or we'd have escalation pauses, and we had an escalatory ladder, and there were going to be negotiating the mind boggles at this. I haven't seen a lot of work on this, actually, and there should be more of it, because there's a lot to learn from the whole notion of, using conventional and nuclear forces together. Have you done much work on this? No. It's interesting. There's no... Okay, I'll get back to the nuclear posture review. Is that what you were talking about? We're once more at a threshold. So in the Cheney thing, just to finish that off, a lot of yelling and screaming, and it did actually prompt a review, a big review of the targeting base under General Butler, and a reduction of strategic forces and a so-called living PSYOP, which some people call the dial-less PSYOP, where you could do smaller scale, much smaller scale attacks, and increasingly expanding it out to regional targets. So what's new? what are we going to do? I think that's a question for Jeffrey. No. It is a question for Jeffrey, since he's been studying this carefully. This is a classic collision of governance, and one unique to Washington, because this is a toxic issue. As much as there is encouraging talk about at the elite level and across the grassroots of the elimination of nuclear weapons, and increasing momentum towards bringing this whole topic out, there are still bedrocks of embedded resistance to that draw the line to exclude discourse. At some point, there's a resistance that will kick you out. I study that phenomenology in a different study, but it's very pertinent to that. It's about how do you change the narrative, especially in cloistered circles of national security. How do you create innovation when there's been nothing but secrecy and resistance to innovation? And it's an issue of governance to some degree, but it's also an issue of understanding what's going on inside a very, very sequestered world that really hates intrusion. And I'd say a lot of progress has been made, but I also say that a lot of things are still very much the same. You have a collision of consensus, and a consensus on the one hand that says we shouldn't have these weapons. Strategic forces in particular look like talismans of the past. They look like Aztec, you know. You can't think of a contingency now where they would be usable unless you come up with these scenarios in which Russia suddenly goes berserk and so forth. But still, retaliation against Russia with large numbers of strategic forces, it's not plausible to come up with a real scenario in which the Russians become the hegemonial bear and attack the United States. And so it's not about that. But the idea of even embracing the goal of zero nuclear weapons is competing with a fundamentally different, contradictory, and equally fervently held consensus that says the following, as you all know. Nuclear weapons prevent war. They always will prevent war. You need to have more nuclear weapons than your greatest adversary. No matter who your adversary is, or adversaries, you've got to have more. Now, we're saying this at the same time that if we'd found one or two leaky atomic devices in Iraq before Desert Storm, that many argue might have deterred our ability to put together a coalition to go and rescue Kuwait. But numbers still matter. And you ask people who think this to reconcile the two devices in Iraq versus we need 1,000 or we need 1,500. I've never gotten an answer for that. Have you?
Not one I like.
Because a lot of the discussion has to do with who you are as a guy. I mean, I'm not going to do this like Helen Caldecott thing, but what you say about your number says a lot about who you are, and it makes me crazy because many people who have numbers don't know what they're saying in the sense of what are you holding at risk, for what purpose, with what assumptions. And fundamental elements of that number, like damage expectancies, the kinds of things that Lynn Eden wrote about in this wonderful book that none of you will read, but you should read it. It's called Whole World on Fire. She wrote an entire book about the science of targeting that is actually really about the mystery of innovation in bureaucracy. It's very much related to what we're talking about. Having shown the planners of the PSYOP how you could actually, they only measure blast effect. They don't measure all the tertiary effects when calculating how many weapons you need to how many targets. Because of an orthodoxy that you can't really measure fire or wind or radiation. So a group of scientists very familiar to the people inside the planning apparatus worked to show how you could, in fact, measure these tertiary, so-called tertiary effects with the same methodology. And after they were done, they said, nah. Yeah, see. So I'm very interested in how you change orthodoxy. And this is what this debate is about. But I'm really interested in how you change orthodoxy when it's toxic to try. When you embark on a mission that makes complete sense and is totally defensible, but you still run the risk of doing damage to yourself. And many people move towards it, and then they realize they shouldn't. And when people get caught up in it, if they make a little extra move, typically they'll find themselves alone. You know, like, where are my friends? And this is pretty much what happened in the 1994 nuclear force posture. There was one particular person who moved out, whose job it was to move out and ask tough questions. The Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy, whose name I can't repeat because he got so mad about my writing that book. He was a little too brash, some say, but he was asking questions that were totally legitimate. Why do we have a triad after the end of the Soviet Union? Why do we need to have a triad? What is the definition of deterrence after the Cold War? Can we substitute conventional forces for some of these nuclear forces? Everything, according to the Secretary of Defense then, Les Aspin, everything is on the table now because the Soviets are gone. And the system proved so allergic, even to the questions, that he had his head handed to him and ended up in the tank being yelled at by, the tank is in the Pentagon, it's not a real tank, being yelled at by senior officers who also leaked various things that made his life extremely difficult to senators who really didn't care what actually was going on, but said, like Strom Thurmond, what the hell he's doing to the triad. And in this case, he backed off. He just backed off. And oddly, Elusive Consensus, which is liked by people in this room, or some, I guess, is really disliked by the protagonist, who is really the hero of the story. But he said none of it ever happened. That was really strange when I was publishing this book, because I was working with him all the time. And I said, I never actually formally interviewed you for this. He said, this never happened. And I said, I have, 10 dozen interviews. And he said, never happened. I should wrap this up. A few things about this coming review. We are taking on this debate publicly for two reasons. One, because of the the Four Horsemen phenomenon, and two, because of the Congressional Review. You already see in the Congressional Review the tilt towards the status quo minus. Excuse me for saying that. I don't mean to discourage progress in any way, but when it came time to pick the members, you head for the right, except for Mort Halperin, who, he's got 100 lives, and good for him. What?
That's a number.
The Congress has no voice in the setting of priorities in nuclear strategy and the nuclear posture of any kind at all. This is actually, to the degree that this is a congressional initiative, which it isn't really. And what I mean by congressional, one of the big reason that we have such a disconnect between the politics of what we want from nuclear weapons, what is it that we hope to achieve by having a nuclear deterrent, and what is actually contained in the war plans, and what would happen in the event there were a nuclear crisis. The fact that those are so disconnected, in part, rests with the fact that the Congress has been denied any oversight capability and has never really asked for one, with the one exception of Senator Bob Kerrey a few years ago, who asked for a PSYOP briefing and was, Stratcom came over and then told him he had no need to know. And he had a very, sort of wasted time trying to find out what is in the targeting plans that we pay for year after year after year. Therefore, the Congress advocates each year to a strategy about which it knows nothing, or close to nothing. They called in Bruce Blair, who's not an official, who gave them a very good briefing about what's in the PSYOP and what our posture is, until Stratcom objected and said they were going to take his clearances away. He said, they took my clearances away 30 years ago. But he got kicked out anyway. Besides the Congress, clearly it's very difficult to have a public debate that actually can go to the heart of the matter, which is we've got targets with numbers, with weapons that are based on calculations of damage expectancies and other things that are extremely difficult for people to understand and weigh in on. And this is right where we are right now, on this cusp between this debate that, on the one hand, the status quo are the people that say, don't mess with things. I can tell you that 1,000 weapons is good. Versus the very, very powerful people saying, we can go much lower than that, we can move to zero. But neither one of those groups is really working the issue of, 1,000, Zeppelins? For what? For what purpose? In the same way that the groups that are talking about zero or moving to zero are not going to be able to obviously get into the interstices of all this. So how do you mobilize an administration? And, the rest of this is all a bummer, so excuse me for that. But it's got to be the president. This is such a trite thing to say. I've just said it. But without the president completely committed to the goal of harmonizing, how about that? Harmonizing the nuclear posture to some set of principles and goals, there's nothing to be done. The resilience of the status quo, the resilience of the internal bureaucracy is legendary. One of these generals said to me, don't even go to the PSYOP. He said that those are the family jewels. But to the degree that's changed, it's changed. There's a lot of people on the inside who are sympathetic to moving away, certainly, from centralized plans that are based on launch on warning and based on prompt counterforce, but not for they don't like amateurs. Let me just go quickly, and I've run out of time. You can't negotiate objectives. You've got to give, was a lesson that Bush 1 actually really was exemplary. Having set the objectives, he let his people do the tactics, but he didn't back off the objectives. When he said, get the tactical nukes out of Europe, he didn't fool around. But he let his people figure out how to diffuse the bureaucracy and also let them know that he would stand by them no matter what the controversies they encountered. It didn't hurt that he had subordinates like Cheney and Powell and Scowcroft, who know how to get around, but that's a good idea too. Not those specific people, but. And that's the third lesson is don't, I said lose the whiz kids. And then I remembered that Mort was a whiz kid. But he was a good whiz kid. You don't want a bunch of, I can't say that either. I was going to say Harvard Yard guys. But seasoned professionals who are loyal to the president, which is not an impossible combination, actually. You can have political appointees who like the president and are also professionals who can work the problem, diffuse opposition, but are not insulting and, sort of, I'm an assistant secretary. I mean, it's like every new administration, you have to put up with this learning curve that's so steep. And if you stick around and watch them long enough, you can get pretty cynical about it. And you have to watch them go through this sort of, contortions until they get the message. But there's no need for that. You don't, I said professionals should trump social climbers. Did I really say that?
You did.
That's so rude.
I was personally offended.
Professionals should trump social climbers when it comes to crafting nuclear survival. That's so. Support your people is really, I said ready the poison stiletto. Sometimes you have to fire people. It's one of the lessons that I actually learned from one of those peaceniks, Richard Armitage. He was being asked by his Secretary of Defense, who, I won't name, who was complaining that he was getting a lot of pushback from the uniformed military, and he just wasn't getting, what he wanted. And so Armitage said, he's talking about the Joint Chiefs. Armitage said, "So fire one." I goes, "What?" He said, "Fire one of the chiefs. Just fire one." And he said, "I can't do that. I can imagine the controversy." And he goes, "So fire another one." And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, there's a lot of truth to just, you've got to stand up to things, and that, this is, the last thing is that it's not the fault of the professional military that our nuclear posture is so out of whack with what most people would consider to be necessary for an enlightened form of the kind of message that the United States wants to send to the rest of the world. There is, fundamentally, this clash of consensus. Some people think that having nuclear weapons helps to deter proliferation. And other people think and understand that having nuclear weapons completely undermines a message that you want to impart, that nuclear weapons have no utility, they don't belong because they're unbelievably hard to manage. It's not a cause-effect thing that opponents of this argument say, you think India is going to do anything just because it's just bogus. But you can't blame this on the military because, A, they don't like nuclear weapons for the most part, and second, the whole sort of mess is a governance mess that wasn't caused by the military. It was caused by the unbelievable dereliction of duty on the part of the political authorities, civilian authorities. And it's going to take time to undo it. And this is the problem with this issue being joined by the grassroots, is that as a community, we have ADD. And, you don't have to, you can erase that part, right, because I won't get any more funding. But I would urge that everyone who joins this issue, one, work together, and two, be patient, because this issue can't be hijacked by very impatient, single issue people who don't want to take the time and the discipline to try to change something that's been around for several decades. Thank you.
So what we'll do now is we'll take a few questions. We've got a little over half an hour, but I'm actually going to stand so I can actually see people over here. And I wanted to start by asking a question about the decisions that the president should make against the decisions that he should ask the bureaucracy for answers for, or she, I guess. Senator Clinton is still out there chucking. And Stephen, I made you wince when I was flip about this current nuclear posture review, but there is a difference in this legislation, I think, compared to the previous one, and there are two of them, and they're important. One is that there is a sort of widespread, I think, bipartisan sense in Congress, and it was also a Republican Congress that killed a bunch of these Bush administration initiatives, and so there's a genuine set of questions. And the second is, in the legislation for the Nuclear Posture Review, there are a series of kind of interlocking reviews, right? There's the Strategic Posture Commission, there's a presidential review. Is that correct, Stephen? No. But there's the Posture Commission we end up with, right? And presumably the president can do an independent review. And so what decisions do you think the president needs to make? I mean, you said don't negotiate on objectives, right? So, like, what are those objectives that the president needs to set? You know, I mean, is it the number? Is it the purpose? What, you know, what does that document look like? And then what does he ask the bureaucracy for?
I don't have the answer to that. I think that it's like when people used to design their own favorite. I should probably stand. Do you want to just?
Or do they feel better if I sat?
No, I don't care. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Closer.
Closer. Bring the.
Closer.
It would be like my giving my answers to that, which is like in the Cold War, people used to design their favorite force postures. The question is, who's the president, and who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and who's, what's going on in the general politics? I mean, my priority would be, first and foremost, you don't need forces on alert, and you don't need to wage war with nuclear weapons. Those are pretty no-brainer things that would be vociferously resisted by certain numbers of people, but a president could state to be factually needed. Who are we going to wage war with strategic forces? I mean, I think you could, that off the bat, those are, but that's my wish list. If you asked Hans that question, he would have probably a long list of, I mean, how do you answer that question, honestly?
Hans, do you have a different wish list?
That goes halfway. Good.
What's the other half?
Well, the alert forces, for example, is mentioned all the time. One of the things that really strikes me is that we still have an operational nuclear war plant. We still have the nuclear forces ready to go. It's not just a question of alert. It's the question of their posture and plan, fully operational. And that strikes me to be a strange posture to have a decade and a half after the end of the Cold War.
So the other dilemma here is that you have to gauge how much the system can take. So it depends also on what kind of president you are. I mean, I'm very much an incrementalist who's not into getting backlash. But it depends on who's backing you up. It depends on who your subordinates are. It depends on how much support you can find inside from many of the generals and admirals who support the idea that we have way too much money invested in nuclear weapons and that this operational posture is dangerous, it's not getting us anywhere, et cetera, et cetera. And the political context, because we have at the moment no congressional body that can look at war plans. I mean, that's ludicrous.
Rob?
So.
Oh, we should, I know I just called you Rob, but you should introduce yourself for others who don't know.
Rob Nelson from the University of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So you sort of alluded to this. One big difference between today and 14 years ago is that the Pentagon is not full of nuclear warriors whose careers were invested in the Cold War nuclear arsenal, at least not as much. It's been 14 years of retirement. So is there some hope that the next president won't get the same kind of backlash as we saw in '94, simply because the Pentagon is not as invested today in the status quo as it was then?
See, I think if you look at the way in which the '94 review was done, it wasn't people who were deeply invested in the posture who were part of the non-response. It was the kind of daily grind. It was the way in which the whole building, the way the posture review was run. It was these working groups with people that knew next to nothing, many of them, about what was at stake, being given very routine questions that they didn't really know the implications of, and you got the lowest common denominator. So organization had something to do with it. The backlash didn't really come from big nuclear warriors. It came from the resentment of the brass that they were being treated abysmally, partly by these sort of rude civilians. It came from a general sense that they were not in competent hands. That there's this sort of idea that you could have this whole tabula rasa assault on orthodoxy without any preparation or effort to build coalitions. So I don't know I think the answer is yes, definitely. You have all these great people like General Cartwright, but if you sandbag him, you know, he's going to go with his, I was going to say with his homies, but, you know, I wouldn't put up with that. You know, and this whole idea that there's been a civilian, you know, enlightened versus the military not so smart approach, which is really, and this is wrong. It's also rude. Nobody.
Dr. Pollack.
Jonathan Pollack.
Hello, Dr. Pollack.
You said you're an incrementalist, and it's really a variation on the question that you posed, because nuclear activities are not really a career builder within the uniform military corps. And the consequences of that over time are not insignificant. If you're asking about equities that people feel compelled to defend and fight to the death about. So there may be some good news here, but what maybe this suggests is that there is over time kind of a market-driven strategy where there's just diminishing interest of all kinds. What you're pointing out, however, is that the system, whatever that is, has a very, very reactive quality if it feels that it's either dressed down or threatened in one way or another. So maybe the optimal case here is kind of a respectful strategy from the top, but also really mindful of just the kind of transition that is going on, if you will, every day.
Exactly.
So there's something here that is a kind of a top-down and bottom-up, but it's going to require very careful nurturance and just not doing stupid things along the way.
Which is, exactly, I completely agree with that. And I think this is what makes Jeffrey's study very important, that there is as much emphasis here, I think, on the how as the what. The how of what you do is going to determine, to some great degree, what you get. And there is so much ferment inside that you've got lots of people to work with, but a kamikaze assault is going to get probably the same results. And there are other things that people have talked about, like the Eisenhower Solarium Committee approach, where you have a group of advisors who are not of the White House, but help you to, again, diffuse opposition, bring out people who would work with you. Building coalitions, you know, this is what I believe in.
Because, Janne, if I could just do a two-finger on this, I mean, can't you think of other very noxious policy issues where people could not imagine where there could be traction and movement, and yet over time there is a significant sort? I mean, I can certainly think of a few that immediately come to mind.
Yeah, I'm writing a whole book about that. I'm writing a whole book about that.
Yeah,
we just had a meeting last Monday about the NIE on Iran. And, you know, it's come to the point now that policy people are reaching into the intelligence community and calling by name intelligence analysts for alleged bias. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, but now it's gotten really bad. But it's even worse, this meeting that I chaired on Monday, that the intelligence officials are not taking it for granted. Saying, well, it's not so bad. Like, you know, we had to find a sort of word between pursue and go after, and, you know, it's like, goes with the job. And the fact that there's a complete suspension of the integrity of the intelligence process is not even, it's not even considered anymore. So, yes, actually this, it's kind of Freudian totem and taboo thing. It's very much part of the Washington discourse.
Bruce McDonald.
Bruce McDonald. I'm wrapping up a study for the Council on Foreign Relations on Chinese military space. A comment and then a question. I just wanted to second what you said about the reaction of the military to any inquiry from Congress about targeting policy. When I worked for Senator Bumpers, we tried to get an amendment in for some kind of briefing of Congress on the PSYOP, and the reaction was one like, you were asking for something you had absolutely no business asking for, and how dare you? And the best we settled for was some summary briefing to the President pro tempore of the Senate or something like that. I mean, it was exactly the way you described it. My question is, targeting policy clearly sort of controls everything, and people on the outside too often don't recognize that. But the targeting policy from the PSYOP, ultimately there is guidance from the president through the National Security Council to the construction of the PSYOP. My question is, how tightly linked do you see that as being? Is that if you had a good, credible directive from the president on nuclear targeting policy, is the Defense Department or the Joint Chiefs so intransigent they'd sort of keep on doing what they do anyway? Or, as I've heard some say, well, we only do what we're told to do, and so you really can't blame us. It ultimately goes back to the guidance they get from the president. Do you think that it is that tightly linked, or is there a tendency, is there so much sort of inertia that that we need so many, one of the big factors keeping President Clinton from going down lower on reductions was just the military came back and said, this is what we got to have in order to do what you told us to do. How tight do you see that linkage starting from the White House and going to the Joint Chiefs?
The guidance is so. The book fell open, and there's a quote from this is a long time, 20 years, JSTPS guide saying that planners were often reduced to reading the New York Times to try to figure out what the policy was because the guidance is so vague, and at the end of the day, it's technology driven to some great degree. It's certainly culturally driven, but there's not much you can do with nuclear weapons. Whether the guidance is that you're going to wage and win in a protracted war, or it's that you're going to have withholding clauses or what have you. There's a guidance, I guess, when you get below a certain number, where you can't do prompt counterforce. Or there's guidance that says, don't do prompt counterforce. I suppose you could follow that. But guidance has never been, it's always the response that you get that, well, we just follow the guidance. And to the best of their abilities, if you understand or agree that your forces are not survivable unless you launch them so quickly that you might, it's right up to the cusp of launch first. But we don't want to get into that. So, you can't change the technological factoid that unless you poise your forces in that way, you can't guarantee your civilian authorities that they're going to survive. And the idea that, riding out an attack, hello? What? Ooh.
Yeah, cooties. There's a clean one there, though. Oh, okay. Before we go back to Gareth Porter, I wanted to follow up on that because that was something that we talked about in our group. When we talked about targeting, I made what I thought was the eminently sensible suggestion that we should only target with nuclear weapons those targets that can't be held at risk with conventional weapons. And I was sort of immediately told that that was really quite silly because there would then be no targeting base. And so try again, kid. And the thing that we ended up sort of settling on is, there are a few things, but you were teasing me a little bit about everybody having a number. But one solution is just to say, look, this is the number. It's 1,000 total, period. You don't get any more than that. And here's sort of the general vague guidance. And if there's a requirements shortfall, well, the military has requirements shortfalls all the time. And that was a suggestion by I have to observe the Chatham House rule. That was a suggestion by a retired military official who you know quite well, and maybe makes an appearance in one or two of your books. And so, is there something fundamentally wrong with that kind of trimming the hedge approach where you just say, look, I don't really care how you do it because we all know that what deters people is the fact that we have them and that we could do it. And they don't know the targeting policy anyway, right?
Well, it's sort of, I guess, yeah, except that you're sticking the military with these impossible tasks. It's all, since massive retaliation, there's not been a consonance between the declaratory doctrine and operational doctrine. Massive retaliation was just you dump everything you have, right? Curtis LeMay was happy with that. It worked well. See, right here.
I didn't even see who it was.
Bill Harton.
Oh, yes.
Part of the time.
Part of the time. Since then, it's just been this, crazy disconnect again, because maybe one day we will realize that nuclear weapons, this elusive quest, and I could coin a phrase, to harness the unbelievable lethality of nuclear power to be useful on the battlefield in a way that you can declare calculable victory, political and military. I haven't been able to do it. We've been working on it for 50, 60 years. Finally, perhaps, it's not an ideological statement, we will say, these things are really a pain in the butt, they're really dangerous, they're really expensive, they're not bang for the buck. And they're the one thing that actually potentially really threatens the United States' supreme power as the sole superpower with reconnaissance strike or whatever the Soviets used to call it. So maybe we should not have them. They belong on the scrap heap of history, like, I used to say torture, but,
We got Gareth on the port, and then we'll come back to Hans.
Yeah, first of all, I'm enormously admiring of your work and your willingness to take on this powerful bureaucratic set of interests.
I have a death wish. Thank you.
And I'm really interested in particular in the way in which you conceptualize the problem. And I want to ask you to clarify it further. You've talked mostly in the question and answer period about, high military people involved in this getting their backs up over the way in which they've been approached. But you obviously have a deeper structural understanding of this. And I want to ask you to go just a bit into that. How do you understand the nature of the bureaucratic interests that are at stake here? And you mentioned that it's not the military's fault, but surely there is there's a specific segment of the military which is obviously the center of this bureaucracy, whereas there are other military bureaucrats who are, as you point out, who have an interest in getting money they can take out of that and put into their own elements of the budget. But could you just talk about that part of the bureaucracy that does have an interest, and what is it that they're protecting? If you can talk about it at that level.
Well, it's not just the bureaucrats, but bureaucracies, as you know, don't know how to do anything but perpetuate it. So, to the degree that there is still a residual, resilient pocket of bureaucracy, it's by its very nature not going to vote itself out. But it has dwindled. But I think as it's dwindled, it's also intensified the resistance. But that's only possible in the larger cultural, philosophical context that there is a bedrock belief that is very widespread that nuclear weapons serve fundamental purposes of security, which is a common set of beliefs in this country that is, that compete with any support for the idea of eliminating nuclear weapons. The last time there was an effort to start a movement to say we should rid the world of nuclear weapons in the early to mid-90s. The Soviet Union was gone. It was a very propitious moment. There was, even Bush talked about a new world order. We were going to have a peace dividend, et cetera, et cetera. People like General Goodpaster chaired the group I was on to look at the elimination of nuclear weapons. It was not sporting how easy it was to ridicule this movement out of existence. In fact, Richard Haas wrote an op-ed that said, "Oh, how impossibly naive are these people." That was it. Done. Gone. Now, the question is this time, is it going to be possible to appeal to the inherently conservative nature of this debate? You have nuclear weapons. Most people don't know why, but they kind of feel good. They're an insurance policy. There's the whole Cold War belief that they prevented war, that they're kind of protective. there's a feeling that they don't cost anything. They don't, you know, why not have them? I mean, it's the same sense that you get from the comprehensive test ban, the idea that we have these weapons, but you're not going to test them. That seems wrong. It's a big uphill battle that you fight culturally, historically, psychologically, actually, which shouldn't be true. And much of that thinking is concentrated in Washington. I don't think well, I can't say, but you know, if you ask most Americans, the fight to be fought has only begun in the sense of articulating the other side. If you tell people that the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, knows nothing about what would happen in a nuclear crisis, that he's never been briefed about fully in any detail about what would happen if, in fact, there was a decision to use nuclear weapons. And there never was during the Cold War. No president has ever been briefed in a way that would make him informed about what to do within a 20-minute span of decisions. That's generous. And that our forces are still at that alert stage that if it ever came to that, if you had to do a prompt response, you know, it's, I mean, talk about dereliction of duty. It's beyond belief. But, you know, everybody believes that Nicole Kidman would come and take care of it. Because it's too difficult. I mean, there's too many things that are very hard. The idea that their bureaucrats deal with this and, you know, a lot of other things. So I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but...
Well, you know, if I could just do a 5-second follow-up. Is it the demand, the desire to hold together the status quo of the bureaucratic structure and what they control, or is there another element here that is more psychological in your view? I guess that's.
Yeah, I think it's a broad cultural core belief that needs to be adapted, changed, persuaded. I mean, you find core beliefs are those that you ask questions all the way down to you can't answer the question. The reasons for why you believe something, like, you know, do you think it's okay to murder someone? You say no, and you say why. You know, but I think it's very much on that level. You say, are nuclear weapons helpful? A lot of people say yes. You know, because there's no information out there about what's going on here.
Mike Gerson.
I'm Mike Gerson from the Center for Naval Analyses, not the speechwriter. My question is, you talked about this gap, you mentioned briefly this long, well-known gap between declaratory policy and actual, you know, the PSYOP in the Cold War. You talked about, you know, the difference between letting the professionals, the sort of political appointees versus the military and the sort of bureaucrats. It seems that a lot of what animates the debate today is fundamental questions about the utility of nuclear weapons. And if that's the case, aren't you asking the wrong people if you ask the military to figure that out? Because their job is to put kinetic and non-kinetic tools in the toolbox. And it seems like when you talk to people in the Pentagon, but in uniform, and the bureaucrats who work for them, whose job it is to think about putting targets and putting stuff on platforms and then putting them in the right positions, and that's how they think. And they think in terms of balance of forces, so they inherently see any other capability on somebody else's side as inherently threatening because that's the way they think. You're asking them to come up with decisions about the fundamental logic of nuclear weapons.
No, that's what happened in 1994. And there wasn't even people necessarily who were involved in the planning apparatus. It was left to sort of mid-level military and civilians, to professionals, to answer questions that were fundamentally political and sometimes even philosophical in nature. You're absolutely right. Yeah, no, you don't.
So do we need then top-level guidance that says this is the basic philosophy? A president who says, I believe in minimum deterrence. I think nuclear weapons deter by the very fact that they exist. I think that what we do, I mean, just as I'm spinning, I mean, you can make all these assumptions about what we do with our nuclear weapons, whether keeping them on alert or doing this, send some signal to other countries like someone else is going to build nuclear weapons because we have them on alert. I mean, if you could solve at the top those basic theoretical questions, which are the really tricky ones down at the lower levels, you could have some much clearer guides if you solve those issues, because it's all theory, right?
Well, it's not all theory. It's actually the most powerful message I would submit is sent by the operational stature of, certainly this was true in the Cold War, and it's still true for Russia and China. And then there's another message that's sent from the fact that we talk about the fact that we must have X number of nuclear forces or else we're not a superpower, which is the kind of loose talk that doesn't help you very much when you're going out and saying nuclear weapons are really bad for you. You shouldn't have a program, But I think that what you're saying is consistent with what we said before, that the president has got to. This is a presidential decision. The president says not just the message, but the instructions. And the president has to stick to what the objectives are set and stand by his people the whole way, as Bush 1 did with his immediate subordinates, who were tough people. Now, getting attack nukes out of Europe was a specific objective, but it was huge. No one had done that. Nobody had ever made a unilateral declaration of that magnitude, but to some degree it was a lot easier than what we're talking about, which is undoing decades of bureaucracy, culture, belief systems. It's very complex, especially when you're dealing with toxic stuff, which, and Jeffrey knows. Look at the composition of the Township Commission. What does it tell you? There are a lot of people that are very brilliant on this topic who are not invited. A lot of people that I've never heard of. Not that they're bad people, but... And Jim Woolsey's on it. Nothing wrong with that. So, the politics are really important. And you don't tread down this road lightly, is ultimately the point, because you'll get your head handed to you, and then where will you be?
Yeah. Did you want to take that?
No, I'm sorry. The moderator.
You certainly... Leonora is behind you and had her hand up.
Moderator rules.
Leonora Tamiro with the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. My question was, how does the timing of the nuclear posture review affect what the president can decide to do? Are there things that can be done before the nuclear posture review? We talked about setting early objectives, and certainly those hopefully would come soon after the president was inaugurated. But are there issues that policy changes like no first use policy or de-alerting that you talked about that can be done before the nuclear posture review is finished, or would the nuclear posture review have to take those things into account, and then there would be a delay before any actual change could be made?
That's a really good question, because for all the promise of having a congressional review, I don't know whether it binds the president, or I don't know if it doesn't bind the president, but I don't know if it binds the president politically. In other words, if it sets a bar high or low, if it becomes the floor, it's a tricky thing to have this public. So the answer is, technically, no, it doesn't bar the president. I agree, legally it doesn't. But it produces an atmospheric that it is very tricky. Sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for.
Hi, I'm Diane Perlman, and I'm on the Global Council of Abolition 2000, and also a psychologist for social responsibility. And thank you. Your presentation is very attuned to my, most of my life's work and thinking about the collective psychological dynamics and how we change paradigm, which is, I think, what you're talking about. Just a few thoughts that, one is, the core beliefs are false beliefs. And, one way is to, and there's a lot of mystification and language framing, and that there are ways that we can break through that. And like Ramshi said, point out the gross discrepancies in this paradigm, which has no end game, but then we have to provide an alternate one. And some of you may know Rob Green from Lieutenant Rob Green with the MPT, but he has a book, The Naked Nuclear Emperor. He said, deterrence is, the practice of making nuclear war more likely by trying to make it less likely. And also, deterrence is not proven. It can break down. And, Ralph K. White said it works best when it's accompanied by drastic tension reduction. And then we also have spiral theory. And I think right now we're at a moment in history where, we're provoking a nuclear spiral in our attempts to create, to promote non-proliferation, or actually provoking, like the law of opposites. So, I think they're like psychological kinds of framing message, and also it's really bizarre that in a lot of the meetings I go to, we're talking about something like it's normal that's completely nuts.
Yeah, that part is definitely true. It's also that in this town, everything's personal. You have an argument with somebody, especially about these kind of issues, and they're not your friend anymore, which I find really bizarre. I don't mean, I'm exaggerating, but I've had arguments with Bruce, and I can't remember any. We used to work in the Senate together, and it was extremely collegial. We worked on both sides of the aisle. There's a small number of people who worked on national security issues. And we collaborated because there was a small number of people that worked on national security and arms control. And, I remember a few fights, but you had to regroup because you had to work together to get anything done. I don't spend any time on the Hill, rarely, and it's just so completely different. Senators don't even go to the Senate dining room anymore because they hate each other so much. But I've had disagreements with people over time on this topic who don't talk to me. What's the point? They were just disagreed with what I said, so they don't, so there's all kinds of, weird sociology and anthropology involved in these issues. And there's a lot of Darwinism that's exacerbated by the fact that there's not enough money. So even groups that are close to one another in belief systems can hate each other, which really distresses me because they should be working together, but often it's even like-minded groups that start really savaging each other because they're too close and they're struggling for resources. And that's crazy because there aren't enough people working the same cause.
Hans and Stephen, and then we'll let you wrap up because we're out of time.
Hans Christensen, Federation of American Scientists. I want to bring it to the election. There have been a lot of statements made about what the candidates' views are on what the policy should or should not be. I see mostly messages circulating what they say we should do in terms of reducing and elimination, or the ultimate goal and all these things. But few of them that's to talk about what the candidates think the nuclear policy should be in terms of what the role of nuclear weapons is. What's your take on that, the dividing lines here between the various candidates?
And then can we take Stephen's, and then we'll just let you wrap up.
Just want to get your take on how you would respond to, or how you think about two of the reasons why some folks in shotgun seconds to leave weapons. A, they make the world safer through Congressional work. They don't believe we're going to have a little war minutes and happen like that. And B, the deterrence, we don't know what deterrence we do, what we're doing it. And we don't know if that's some just in case, because we don't know what it is anymore. So could we have some just in case, because we don't know. How do you respond to those arguments for keeping this going?
Yeah, and then to Hans's question, I would say to a candidate that I were advising that the worst time to talk about nuclear policy is during a campaign. And there's some arguments that I spent some time in the Iowa caucus, and there was some discussions that were interesting actually with some of the very progressive groups came to the decision that there's some things you just should not make your candidate talk about. And the right learned that. Some of it is that the right's actually gotten more extreme, and they, now they're the ones who are putting their candidates through the extreme tests, making them be very specific about, very divisive issues like abortion and things like that. it's just not a good campaign issue, so you fudge it. You know, it's antithetical, to especially in Iowa. This is the time we have to talk about stuff, and you're telling us to be quiet. But they were actually inflicting this on themselves. The question, you know, about nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, for some people, most people, are just kind of an infinite good, infinite commodity. They don't cost anything. They just sit there. If you have a few, you have little deterrence, why not have more? They're just kind of like marshmallows. You know, why not? And so, until there's some much better understanding of why, they accord superpower status, they do this, they do that. And, you know, we've played right into the hands of a number of these countries, like North Korea, by saying, the sky's falling. I mean, it's very serious, but we don't have to say, you guys are now, you're so scary now. Because you have 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever. And the disparity now is not, on the one hand we say numbers really matter, and on the other hand we say, well, 2 or 5 or 10 really matter. And so it's no longer the disparity of numbers, really. It's a disparity of alleged willingness to use. And we say that we will never use nuclear weapons, but those horrible North Koreans will. So what does that mean? It seems to me that we should be working on motives, not numbers.
It's a nice place to live.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks.